First of all, I'd like to start by thanking the Center for Security Policy for organizing this event today and inviting me here to speak. And I also want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and spend your lunch here. Before I start, I just want to again introduce myself. I'm Marisa Cochrane. I manage the research at the Institute for the Study of War. And for those of you who aren't familiar, ISW was formed 2 years ago by Kimberly Kagan, who is the current president of ISW. She is a military historian by training and a former professor at West Point. And she formed the Institute to fill the gap between military leadership and civilian leadership, and to help civilian leaders in particular understand what was going on down in theater, understand military operations, and also to educate civilian leaders in areas of security and national security policy and military operations. We have packets for you all today which have some of our recent products, but I'll refer you to my colleague Megan Ortegas for more information either about the Institute or for more of our research materials. What I want to do is talk to you about Iraq and the transition that's been going on. And while Iraq hasn't been making the front page as recently these days, it is actually in a critical period of transition. The most visible, perhaps the most visible sign of this transition is the June 30th withdrawal of coalition forces from the cities. This was a part of the security agreement, which was negotiated and ratified by both Iraqi and U.S. officials late last year, so under the previous administration. And under the terms of the agreement, U.S. forces were scheduled to fully withdraw from cities, all combat forces, by June 30th. They were going to be withdrawing to bases in the rural areas and belts around the cities. And under these terms, they are only allowed to enter the cities with permission or the request of the Iraqi forces, and also in partnership with the Iraqi forces. So, and to facilitate this coordination, what's happened is there have been military centers with both Iraqi and U.S. Military personnel working to coordinate U.S. troop movements into and out of the cities, and just to resolve any difficulties that come with implementing this withdrawal. So currently, U.S. troop strength is at about 130,000, and it looks like it will stay that way at least until September, but actually more likely those numbers will be roughly the same till about January of 2010, because there are Iraqi parliamentary elections scheduled to be held in January 2010, and it looks like U.S. troop numbers will stay fairly steady up until that point, at which point you will likely see a fairly dramatic decline in advance of the August 2010 deadline for the withdrawal of all combat forces from Iraq. And this is under the terms that President Obama has laid out, he laid out shortly after taking office. And what you'll see then after August 2010 is a residual force of between 35,000 and 50,000 troops. Now they won't be labeled combat troops. They'll most likely be serving in advisory and assistance missions. So that's what the overall trajectory of the withdrawal is, and the first milestone was this June 30 date, the pullout of cities. Now the concept behind the withdrawal is that actually Iraqi forces, security forces will stay in the cities, and they'll be responsible for securing the urban areas, and U.S. forces will be operating in the belts, much like was the operational concept to secure Baghdad under the surge. And what they'll do operating in these rural and suburban areas outside of the cities is from there try to stop the flow of militants and of lethal aid into the cities, and kind of form the outer cordon of these urban areas to stop enemy activity from reaching the capital. So that's the operational concept, and that's where we currently are today after June 30th. Now, enemy groups in Iraq, both Sunni and Shia, are trying to take advantage of this withdrawal. And you saw that in advance of the June 30 deadline with a series of attacks, some in Baghdad and others particularly in northern Iraq. And you're seeing that yesterday and in recent days with another uptick. This was not unexpected. In fact, General Odierno, Prime Minister Maliki, and other U.S. and Iraqi senior civilian and military leaders all expected that enemy groups would take advantage of this date for a number of reasons. one, to discredit the Iraqi security forces and make them appear incapable of securing the cities. Two, to call attention to their aims and their groups. And three, to also discredit U.S. forces. So this is something that we've all been watching. We've all been somewhat expecting enemy groups to do. Something to keep in mind, though, is whether or not it's sustainable. Thus far, really since about April, we've seen much more of a cyclical cycle of trending in attacks, where you have maybe 3 or 4 weeks in between some upticks, but the overall levels of violence are continuing to decline. Just to give you some numbers, since the beginning of the surge in early 2007, there were about close to 1,500 attacks per day. As of June 2009, so the month of the withdrawal, there were just over 100 attacks per day. So it's over a 90% decline in attacks. What we're doing at the Institute is we're monitoring whether or not these little spikes become anything more sustained. So we're kind of waiting and watching. But currently, the enemy groups in Iraq, on both the Sunni and Shia side, appear quite fragmented. And it's because of operations over the last 18 months, 2 years. So we want to watch to see if they're able to rebuild their networks to sustain attacks, or if it continues to be these, little upticks, these spikes, particularly in the north, where security was tenuous even before the June 30th withdrawal. It's also worth talking about what this means for the Iraqi security forces, and I'm sure that there are many questions about whether or not they're able to secure these urban areas without U.S. troops, without U.S. combat troops. It is worth mentioning, though, that there are still coalition forces in the cities. However, they are advising and assisting. They're not labeled as combat troops. So they're working with the Iraqis. They're partnering with them. Iraqis are in the lead of all operations, and this wasn't new with June 30th. This was in place even as of January 1 when the security agreement took effect. So that's how U.S. forces are functioning in the cities. The Iraqi security forces since early 2007 have grown dramatically, both in quantity in terms of the numbers. They've increased by, they've doubled from about 325,000 to almost 650,000. So there's been a dramatic increase in the number of Iraqi forces, but there's also been a dramatic increase in quality, particularly in the Iraqi army. And that's through a number of measures taken by coalition forces over the last 2 years that have come to fruition. So there has been a qualitative increase, an improvement in the Iraqi security forces, and particularly the Iraqi army. In terms of their readiness, General Odierno has continued to insist that they are ready to take control of security in urban areas, and he's as have other senior U.S. Military officials and Iraqi officials. But the other point to mention is this is already set in stone with the security agreement. So there isn't too much room to maneuver, particularly because, and I'll get to this a little bit later, but it's an election year in Iraq. So the environment is being also driven by Iraqi politicians' concerns about their domestic constituencies, and it is not in many of their interests to appear to be extending the presence of U.S. forces in the city. So this has made it difficult, particularly in cases like Mosul, where there was some question as to whether or not U.S. forces up there would get an extension to remain in downtown Mosul. That did not happen, and that was due primarily to the fact that it was not a good domestic political maneuver for Iraqi politicians. And the truth is that since January 1st of 2009, Iraqi security forces have been taking more and more lead and more control in securing Iraq. As I said, they've been in the lead since even before the security agreement went into effect, but on January 1, Iraq became a fully sovereign state, and they are leading, planning, and executing all operations. Coalition forces are supporting them and partnering with them and helping them, particularly in key areas of enablers, logistics, certain areas, intelligence, air assets. So coalition forces have been working in partnership with them, and they partner with them on all operations. But the Iraqis have been conducting their own operations without coalition forces. So that's how they've been functioning for the last 6 months, and that's not new to this June 30th deadline. So I've talked a little bit about the security transition. I also want to mention briefly, before we turn to questions, the political transition. As I mentioned, it is an election year. You had provincial elections in January, which ushered in new governments at the provincial level. It also boosted Prime Minister Maliki's position at the national level. And since then, he's been moving forward towards parliamentary elections, which are going to be held in January of 2010. And all Iraqi politicians are focused on that date, on that January 2010 date. So everything in Iraq, all statements, all decisions have to be viewed in the context of the 2010 elections, and particularly this June 30th withdrawal. And we have a report out that documents this a little bit more and discusses some of the current trends and some predictions, which the executive summary is in your packet. But I want to stop there, turn it over to questions. So thank you.